So I went down to WRR because during my national service I'd been acquiring records from a place in Holland, and you could get import records through Holland without having to pay tax. And some of the records that I got were on French RCA Victor records, 10-inch LPs, sleeve notes in French obviously, and they were covering the period in the blues when sort of people were coming up from the south, one man and a guitar, and they were forming little bands before they had electric bands. But they were forming little acoustic bands, and there were records by people like Washboard Sam, Big Bill Brunsey, Jazz Gillum, Maceo Merriweather, mainly stuff derived from RCA's race label, which was Bluebird Records. And so I took these down to the radio station, and to my amazement, because quite clearly the people who were listening to Jimmy Reed records, and even the people who were doing the programme, had no real idea of the history of the blues. You know, they didn't realise that it had existed prior to Chicago and the electric groups and so on. So they were quite amazed to hear these records, because not only were they not available to an American audience at all, but nobody had ever heard them. So I took the records in and said, would you be interested in playing these? And they said, yes, very much so. And I went to sit in the studio while they were playing them, and then they realised there was also, I had a Lightning Hopkins LP which called The Rooster Crowed in England, which was issued on Dobell's records in a limited edition of like a couple of hundred, I think. And Lightning Hopkins was important enough that they were very excited by this, a sort of unavailable Lightning Hopkins LP. So I went in and they were playing these records, and then this Hoss Carroll said, well, let's talk to the man who's loaned them to us. So they put me on the radio, and I think part of the reason they put me on was because I must have sounded so bizarre. And this was after 2 years of national service and a year or so in Dallas, and I thought I'd lost a lot of my accent, but I sounded like a minor member of the royal family. I mean, really quite bizarre, very, very nasal, very high-pitched, and talking the most appalling codswallow.
There's a small record shop in London that caters for these sort of, you know, collectors of these sort of records, and it's on 77 Charing Cross Road, which is the reason it has the name. And they just put out 99 copies of each record they make, because otherwise if they made 100, it'd make it a regular release, they'd have to pay tax on it. Just 99 copies, and it counts as a lot of them I went very deeply into debt while I was in the army, in actual fact, to pay for a lot of these ones that came across from France, the sleeve notes in French. And they're released in France. They may have been released in England by now, I don't know, but I think there's very little chance of them being released over here, because there just isn't a big enough market for them. In Europe, they take this thing very seriously, and they go into sort of cultural and ethnic background of the blues music, which they don't do over here very much.
Oh, you know the rooster crowed in England.